I'm 86 years old, and bone broth is not a wellness trend. It is one of the most biochemically complex, therapeutically dense foods the human body has ever encountered, and the modern world almost made us forget it existed. Most people who hear about bone broth today think they're hearing about something new, a fad, something influencers discovered. But what's actually happening is a rediscovery of something so old, so fundamental to human survival, that it predates agriculture itself. Our ancestors weren't drinking bone broth because it tasted good. They were drinking it because their bodies knew something their minds hadn't yet articulated. They were surviving longer, healing faster, moving better into old age, and nobody called it a superfood. They called it dinner. But here's what most people miss when they talk about bone broth. They talk about it like it's about calcium, like the whole story is minerals leaching out of bones into water. And yes, that happens. But that is the surface of a very, very deep story. The real foundation of what bone broth does begins with collagen, not the kind you rub on your skin, not the powder you dump into a smoothie. Structural collagen, the protein matrix that makes up roughly 30% of all protein in your body. Collagen is the scaffolding of your bones, the lining of your gut, the cushion in your joints, the architecture of your skin. And here's the critical fact that changes how you understand everything else. Your body's ability to produce its own collagen declines steadily after your mid-20s. By your 50s, you're producing significantly less. By your 70s, the deficit becomes visible in your bones, in your joints, in the mirror. When you simmer bones for a long time, and I mean a long time, 12 hours minimum, 24 is better, the heat and water break down the triple helix structure of collagen into gelatin. In gelatin, when it enters your digestive system, breaks down further into specific amino acids, glycine, proline, hydroxyproline. These aren't just building blocks in the abstract sense. They are the precise raw materials your body uses to rebuild collagen. You are giving your body the exact ingredients it needs to repair the exact structures that are degrading with age. But it goes even deeper than that. Glycine is not just a collagen precursor. Glycine is one of the most quietly powerful amino acids in human biochemistry. Your liver uses glycine to produce glutathione, your body's master antioxidant, the compound responsible for cellular detoxification. Without adequate glycine, glutathione synthesis is compromised. And when glutathione is low, oxidative stress accumulates. Oxidative stress is the underlying driver of most degenerative disease, bone density loss, cardiovascular deterioration, cognitive decline. The modern diet is severely deficient in glycine because the modern diet eats muscle meat almost exclusively. Muscle meat is rich in methionine and low in glycine. Bone broth corrects that imbalance. It delivers glycine in significant amounts with every cup. And here's something that almost no one talks about when discussing bone broth and bone density specifically. The conversation almost always starts and ends with calcium. But bone is not just calcium. Bone is a living matrix, a composite of mineral and organic material. The mineral component is primarily calcium phosphate in the form of hydroxyapatite crystals, but those crystals are embedded within a collagen framework. The collagen is what gives bone its flexibility, its resilience, its resistance to fracture. A bone that is pure mineral with no collagen matrix is brittle. It shatters. What keeps bones from breaking isn't just their hardness. It's their combination of hardness and flexibility. Elderly people who fall and fracture bones are often people who have lost not just mineral density, but collagen integrity in the bone matrix itself. The two are inseparable. So when I talk about drinking bone broth twice a week for 55 years and having dense bones at 86, I'm not talking about a calcium supplement. I'm talking about consistent long-term collagen precursor loading. I'm talking about giving the maintenance machinery of my skeleton the raw materials it needed week after week, decade after decade, to keep rebuilding what age was trying to dismantle. The real power is in the consistency and the time horizon. 1 cup of bone broth is not medicine. A decade of bone broth twice a week is a completely different biological reality. The body responds to sustained input. Every repair system in the body is working on a cue. When the raw materials are consistently available, repair happens continuously. When they're absent, the cue builds up, and eventually the damage outpaces the capacity to repair. That is what we call aging. That's the real mechanism. Now let's talk about the gut, because this is where bone broth does something that bone density conversations almost never mention. The gelatin in bone broth has a particular affinity for the mucosal lining of the digestive tract. The gut lining is one of the highest turnover tissues in the body. It replaces itself approximately every 5 days. That renewal process requires collagen, the tight junctions between intestinal cells, the barrier that prevents undigested food particles and pathogens from entering the bloodstream, are maintained by structural proteins that depend on adequate collagen synthesis. The compromised gut lining doesn't just cause digestive symptoms, it creates systemic inflammation, and systemic inflammation is directly antagonistic to bone density. Inflammatory cytokines activate osteoclast activity, the cells that break down bone, while simultaneously suppressing osteoblast activity, the cells that build it. Chronic low-grade inflammation is one of the most underappreciated drivers of bone loss. Healing the gut lining is not separate from protecting your bones. It is part of the same system. And here's another layer that most people haven't considered. Bone broth made properly, from grass-fed animals, from joints and knuckles and feet, not just marrow bones, contains compounds called glycosaminoglycans, chondroitin sulfate, hyaluronic acid, keratin sulfate. These are the molecules that make up cartilage, that lubricate joints, that give connective tissue its ability to hold water and provide cushioning. When you consume these compounds, your body doesn't just absorb them passively. Research suggests they act as signaling molecules, triggering the synthesis of more glycosaminoglycans in your own connective tissue. You're not just replacing lost material, you're signaling your body to increase its own production. That feedback mechanism is what makes food-based collagen sources different from and potentially superior to isolated supplement forms. The matrix of compounds in real bone broth contains signals that isolated extracts don't. The mineral profile also goes far beyond calcium. Properly made bone broth contains magnesium, phosphorus, silicon, sulfur, and trace minerals in forms that are bioavailable because they're already embedded in the same biological context in which the human body uses them. Magnesium is the cofactor for over 300 enzymatic reactions, including the reactions involved in bone mineralization. Most people are deficient in magnesium because it's been stripped from processed food and depleted from soil. Silicon has emerging research supporting its role in collagen synthesis and bone density. It's found in the connective tissue surrounding bones and appears to be involved in the formation of the organic matrix that minerals then crystallize around. These aren't separate effects, they're a coordinated nutritional orchestra. I want to talk about what proper bone broth actually requires, because most of what's sold commercially is a shadow of the real thing. Gelatin-rich broth must gel when cooled. If your broth doesn't set into a jelly in the refrigerator, it hasn't extracted enough collagen to provide meaningful amounts. You need joints, knuckles, chicken feet, pig trotters, beef feet. These are the collagen-dense parts that most people discard. You need time, a long, slow simmer, not a rapid boil, which can degrade some of the more delicate compounds. An acid medium helps. A splash of apple cider vinegar at the start of cooking helps break down the mineral matrix in the bones, releasing more calcium and magnesium into the liquid. And you need quality sourcing. Bones from pastured, grass-fed animals have a different nutrient profile than bones from factory-farmed animals raised on grain and antibiotics in confinement. Now here is the practical application, the part that actually matters for anyone listening. You don't need to drink bone broth every day. Twice a week is what I did. That's it. 1 cup, sometimes 2, twice a week. Made properly, from good joints, long cooked, properly gelled. That's a maintenance dose that, over years and decades, keeps the raw material supply available for all the collagen-dependent systems in your body. It's not dramatic. It's not complicated. It requires no prescription and no specialist. It requires a pot and time and the same animal parts that every traditional culture on earth has been using for thousands of years. The people who have the most trouble accepting this are skeptics. There are people who've been told that food is just calories and macros, that the idea of specific foods doing specific structural things in the body is pseudoscience. But the biochemistry here isn't controversial. The amino acid profile of gelatin is documented. Glycine's role in collagen synthesis and glutathione production is documented. The gut lining's dependence on structural proteins is documented. The connection between systemic inflammation and bone loss is documented. What's missing isn't evidence. What's missing is the willingness to take seriously something that doesn't come in a patented pill. At 86, I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything. My bones speak for themselves. But more than that, My joints move, my gut works, my skin still has some elasticity that surprises my doctors. These things are connected. They're all downstream of the same consistent input into the same biological systems. Collagen precursors, week after week, decade after decade. The body is a system that rewards consistent maintenance. And bone broth, real bone broth made properly and consumed regularly across a lifetime, is one of the most complete, most ancient, most bioavailable forms of that maintenance that human beings have ever found. There's one more layer here that I think is the deepest of all and has to do with how the body uses these inputs across time. We live in a culture that wants immediate results. You take something, you feel something within days or weeks, or you stop taking it. But bones don't work on that timeline. Bone is constantly being remodeled, broken down by osteoclasts and rebuilt by osteoblasts in a continuous cycle called bone remodeling. A complete remodeling cycle in an adult human takes between 3 and 10 years depending on the site in the skeleton. This means that the bones you have at 80 are the product of inputs that stretch back through decades of nutrition, movement, and metabolic signaling. You cannot build dense bones at 80 with decisions you make at 79. You build dense bones at 80 with decisions you made at 30 and 40 and 50 and 60. The compounding is biological, not metaphorical. This is why the question of bone density in old age cannot be separated from the question of sustained nutritional input across a lifetime. We talk about osteoporosis as if it appears suddenly in old age, as if it's a disease that strikes. But it is the cumulative outcome of decades of insufficient raw material supply, insufficient mechanical loading, and insufficient cofactors for mineral metabolism. It is a deficit that accumulates slowly and silently until it becomes visible in a fracture, in a scan, in a stooped posture. By the time it shows up on a DEXA scan, it has been building for 20 or 30 years. The intervention, therefore, cannot be acute. It must be chronic. It must be habitual. And the habit must start early, long before any problem is apparent. And it must be sustained, not because you feel it working, because you won't, not day to day, but because you understand what the body is doing with what you give it, and you trust the process across a time horizon that most people in modern culture find uncomfortable to think about. Bone broth twice a week is one of those habits. It is quiet. It is unsexy. It does not produce immediate feedback that your metrics-obsessed culture can track and chart, but 55 years of it, without interruption, produces something measurable and real and genuinely remarkable. It produces bones that a doctor at 86 looks at and asks what you've been doing, and the answer is the simplest thing in the world: slow-cooked bones, twice a week, for as long as you can remember. That is the whole of it. Not a protocol, not a stack, not a biohacking regimen, a pot on the stove, animal joints, water, time, and the quiet patience to do it again next week and the week after that for the rest of your life. The oldest nutritional wisdom on earth, and the bones to prove it, still works. The secret isn't a secret at all. It's been in every grandmother's kitchen in every culture that ever survived long enough to have grandmothers,